Actually, I'm surprised at the amount of energy considering it's the end of day 2. Welcome to Pax10 Panel Part 2. I'm going to start with having our panelists introduce themselves and their game, starting directly to my left.
Hello? Oh, there you go. My name is Guion Cruz. I'm a designer and co-founder of Feel Every Yummy, and we make Word Fighter for iOS and Android.
Hi, my name is Nick Fisher. I'm with Spiky Snail, and we made the Splatters. I did the programming most of it, but...
My name is Richard Weschler. I'm a game designer on Mike's Plumbing and Tile, Media Arts Division. We're DigiPen students, and we made a flipping good time.
My name is Mike Ambrogi. I'm one of the co-founders of Final Form Games, and we made Jamestown for the PC, and I'm the technical lead artist on the project.
I'm Brendan Chung of Blendo Games. I made all of Edmund's Zombie Smasher.
Yeah! Hi, I'm Jay Watts. I'm the creator of Solar 2. I did everything except the audio. Over there, he did the audio.
My name is Jeff. I'm with Penny Arcade, yay me. And I've been in the industry 17 years. Most of them with Nintendo, where I helped evaluate and games for publication and localization. This panel is for you guys to ask them questions. The mic is set up right there. The first person who gets in line, just flip the on switch. Look at that. I didn't even have to go to my please fill the dead time questions that I have prepared. Go ahead and flip that switch. Go right ahead.
I was just wondering that, how do you feel about being selected for the Pax10? And do you think that it'll actually have a big impact on your games? But even though I was wondering that, my real question is, what is the best pony?
There are no pony questions allowed at this panel. I am anti-Roni. All right, so please talk about how wonderful Pax10 is. No?
Well, I've always been a fan of Penny Arcade and PAX, so it was kind of a dream to get into the Pax10. And for me, being a student, you know, it may not benefit the game, but it's going to benefit my career. So I'm looking for a job, and this definitely helps me get the foot in the door.
Yeah, and it was, I mean, it's an incredible honor to be part of the Pax10, because I know the pedigree of the people have been before. You know, right now I'm still playing Bastion. I love Bastion, and Super Meat Boy was there last year as well. And you know, to be, I mean, even especially the fact that we were the only mobile game this year, I feel like there's a lot to live up to. You know, because you know, in sort of the indie game development industry, mobile games aren't really seen in the best light sometimes, and so we're sort of here to sort of make a big splash and prove them wrong to people who don't think otherwise. You know, but you know, it was just great. It's great to be here.
Yeah, there was an era before Word Fighter. All right, anyway, it's a great honor, and for a game like ours that hasn't been out yet, so it's a great way to get a lot of exposure in a very short period of time. So, go guys.
Next question.
What was the hardest part about making your games?
Don't leave it open-ended. Please talk about your trials and tribulations. Next question. This may be a very short panel.
We're a three-person team at our studio, and we're an utterly flat structure, and we actually decide everything by consensus. And that's very difficult if, like, you know, you have three opinionated, passionate people, and everyone's convinced that, like, you know, the whole game is in this feature, and they have, like, really different opinions about how the feature should be done or what should even be. If it has to be consensus, like, there is no person who can say, well, we're doing this. So, like, deadlock is deadlock, and getting through those times is actually quite difficult occasionally. The benefit is that you all agree about the best course of action when it's all done, but that's pretty challenging.
Yeah, I think for us it was like being a small team, the sheer amount of work and the multidisciplinary work that needs to get done is really overwhelming. So it's like doing 5 things at the same time, and that's for every team member. So it's really a lot of work.
I'm curious, so if we just go down the line, how big's your team, and how long was your dev cycle, or is your dev cycle? So that'll give us some context, I think, for each of the projects.
Sure. Real quick, the Word Fighter is 5 people strong, and it's been since January since we started production, so 8 months.
Yeah, we're currently 4, but the last one just joined a month ago, and we've been working on the game for 3 years. Yep. It's not always full-time, but it's kind of started slower.
We have 6 members, so 3 programmers, 2 designers, and an artist. And being students, we only had about 7 months to work on this game.
Which is incredible. We have 3 core developers, 2 programmers, and me, the artist, and we have a composer and also a sound person that we've worked with remotely. And we finished the game in 21 months.
I'm one person. After a few restarts and redos, it took 8 months or so.
My core team is just me, but I outsourced the audio and stuff to a composer because I suck at that. And it took me 10 months to make Solo 2.
There was one last night, 5 years. So, all right, okay.
I want to answer just that question quick, just to be completely honest. Like, the hardest part is really getting stuff done. And it's because, we're an independent company, and as much as we love to do this full time, we still have bills to pay. And so, we still have day jobs. I contract as an iPhone designer, and they have all their jobs themselves. So it's finding the time in between, the 9 to 5 and the weekends, making sure we get stuff done. And if you're able to do that efficiently, you'll get a lot more done. But it was hard for us. There's spurts of getting nothing done. But but we got there eventually, and we're still figuring it out right now. So.
Yeah, I was actually going to say that time was also our most difficult thing. I mean, we had people on our team that had 20 credits, and we're also learning this. This is the first time we've really dived into this sort of thing.
Okay. All right. Next question.
So, what would you say is the thing that was the hardest to get right about the games that you created, from either a sound, art, or gameplay perspective?
What's the one aspect you spent the most resources on?
I find that the fun of the game is the most hardest part to get. Because art, you can make art look really beautiful.
Don't they have middleware tools for that? Oh, fun.
There's fun powder.
Drink this, keep talking floating.
Open FL.
Yeah, it's just the riskiest part to get, and it's so tempting to I'm going to make this beautiful art and beautiful sound and all this great graphics because I know how to do that really well. But getting the fun is the scariest, and it's hard to just jump into it.
I think finding the right difficulty curve was pretty hard. We did a lot of play testing and a lot of iteration, and that was definitely very time consuming for us.
Yeah, for us it was, we went with a very wacky concept, so we kind of had to reinvent all the mechanics and everything because we didn't rely on any genre to kind of expand on. So we spent almost a year just finding what the game's about.
Yeah, Solo 2 was the same as that. It's a crazy game. It's nothing like really anything out there with its sort of sandboxy, open worldy stuff, and it's really hard because you can't really look at other games and say, oh well, this game is like this and they've done this, so I'm going to try that and see how it works. I didn't really have so much to look at, so it was really just exploring all the ways that I can take the design and pretty much playing around with all the ideas and working out which ideas worked and which ideas didn't. I constantly played my game to try and figure out what were the ideas I should keep working on.
For Wordfighter in particular, we actually got the game concept and mechanics done pretty quick. So the hardest thing for us, or what took the longest time, was actually getting the visual presentation right. Before this, back in the spring, the first few months of development, the game actually looked like just a generic version of Street Fighter with Scrabble tiles at the bottom. And when we showed that to people, a few devs and a few people in the press, they loved it. They loved the concept, but they're like, this just looks like Street Fighter. So with the audience that we're in the iOS market, there's more people than just males who play video games who like Street Fighter that we need to tap into. So if we can cover a much broader demographic, because the game is fun, and now it's a matter of figuring out a style to present it in. And so we had a couple of options. We were even thinking about trying fairy tale characters, to appeal more to kids. things like that. But we settled on doing this twist on like authors turned into superheroes or fighters. And after we did that, it's a matter of getting that style right. So that took quite a while to do.
So everything across the board will cause you problems. All right, next question.
What feature do you regret leaving out the most that you weren't able to do?
Our game is a 4-player cooperative game that only has a local 4-player co-op, and there are a few things that we want more than to have had time to implement online multiplayer. I'd say that's the one we left on the table that we're saddest about.
Yeah, the same with me. I mean, my game is very single player, but a lot of people have really wanted to play multiplayer, and I know smash two systems together and watch all the explosions all happen. That's crazy difficult to try and do as multiplayer. It's just such a different game. It's so hard to do, and I would have loved to spend a lot more time on it, but I just know that if I tried to do it, I would have spent all my time doing on that one thing, and it might not have worked so well. It would have been a really risky thing to do, so I just said no. I'll release first and see how it goes.
Anyone else have a personal one they want to?
Yeah, no, for us it's still like open. We might still drop things. But one of the things we already kind of let go is actually even a local multiplayer. Like we had some concepts early on for 2 players playing together on the same screen and kind of like doing combos together and stuff like that. But at some point we just decided like we got to focus on the strongest aspects, and that wasn't it.
For me, so my game, we were kind of this tactical combat game in the city, and I had this whole other overworld metagame that was kind of loosely based on XCOM, but it just wasn't working out, and I tried to make it work, and it didn't work, so I had to like cut the entire thing out, and I was just terrified, like, oh my god, people are going to see this missing thing, but then I realized no one knows I worked on this thing.
So we're still working on a game, it's not out yet, but we decided to postpone a big feature in our game, which is single player. So we're only launching in the beginning with multiplayer, and that was a decision we made because we have to keep our scope narrow. And I think that's something that all the people here understand. Like, you're such a small team, you cannot just spend forever on your perfect game. And so we want to release it at the right time. So keeping the scope narrow means we only launch with 6 characters and also only multiplayer. And then we could, thankfully with iOS market, you can like promise new features and then update them in the game later. So we will be pushing single player, a story mode later on once we have more time to work on it. Also, the main thing is too, you don't want to sort of overinvest because if we worked on single player all this time, then delay the release, find out it fails in the market completely, we wasted all that time. So at least if the game bombs when it releases, we don't have to waste our time and energy at that point. I'm just trying to be realistic here, It's a business, it really is. So.
All right, next question.
I have this tendency to develop ideas, or come up with ideas, and then spend all of this time refining the idea and not actually do any work, because work is hard. I'm wondering how long, for each of you, how much time elapsed between the initial formulation of the idea and when you actually started working on the idea?
What do you mean by working on the idea? Like,
actively coding, actively creating art assets.
So you're just thinking of the idea and trying to work it out in your head or something?
Yeah. Progressing from the stage where you're thinking about it to the point where you're actually putting code.
Because as sort of a solo team, essentially, I do all the art and programming and design myself. When I was thinking of the idea, I immediately said, all right, I'm going to program this out. And programming was part of my design process. I didn't just sit there and write it down on a piece of paper. So you're very, very different. I mean, if it's just a dedicated designer, obviously they'd have to work on a piece of paper. But for these really small indie teams, you tend to find that the designer might also be an artist or might also be a programmer. So they don't just need to think about it, they can actually start doing concept art or actually doing artwork for the game. So part of their thinking process is work.
So you would say in your case then there was no time elapsed between idea stage and actual work?
Yeah.
One is the same.
Well, there's productive work and then there's not productive work. There's a lot of messy prototypes, which was work, but it didn't really go anywhere. I didn't see it into the final game. But yeah, it's all just one big process. It's not just ideas, now we're going to do art, now we're going to do programming. It's all be one thing.
Yeah, our team started talking maybe a month before we started actually working on it. But I would say, I mean, as soon as you can just start prototyping it, I think you'd be surprised at what you discover and what changes right then and there. So I mean,
it's not prototyping right away.
Yeah, I mean, we prototyped our game in Game Maker. Like, that's really simple. Just dive in, and you'll be surprised at what you'll learn about your own ideas.
We started on the order of like an hour. I mean, I'm not even trying to be snarky. Like, it is very much what these guys are saying. That, you know, especially with if the clock is ticking, which it really was for us. It's, you know, it's do it or don't. You know, it wasn't a lot of kind of staring into space and getting excited about what we hadn't done yet.
I would say we actually spent negative time on our idea. Our idea did not exist until we had worked on the game. Like,
This is basically true.
That's what's, like, it's all true what they said. Like, if you look at the papers we've had, I think we met maybe 4 times before we started working, actually prototyping. If you look at the papers and what we ended up with, there's like maybe slightest resemblance. So I can't think of any other way to design by other than prototyping.
So answer is
Definitely
yes.
an indie company, I think.
All right, thank you.
So I know you are working really hard on trying to finish up your game now, but I was wondering if you have any plans for the future after your game is released, whether that be expanding your team or just simply making another game.
Interesting. So yeah, what are post-release plans?
Vacation.
Continuous
This is my
support.
vacation, so.
So I mentioned single player after release, and also we want to do like downloadable characters and stuff like that. But so that also means potentially like expanding our team to maybe having a writer, because I don't know how to write. But you know, actually even better.
I think it's ironic that the word game has somebody who doesn't
I just design stuff. I draw and tell people what to do. But
It's easy to write, you just do it.
yeah, you know, if we want to incorporate like an actual story mode, then we might hire somebody like that, and you know, like we're not afraid to contract more if we have to.
For us, it's, yeah, we want to go to other platforms. So we started with Xbox Live Arcade and then PC, and then we're even having thoughts about like designing a similar but slightly different game for touch interfaces on tablets, stuff like that.
Yeah, being students, we're restricted that we can't sell our game. But what we're doing afterwards is, you know, we have another project to work on. You know, we have another student project, a year-long project. So I think we're getting ready to start on that.
Our game is out, and you're kind of looking at it. I thought it was going to be like turning in a paper, and it really wasn't. There was no vacation. There was a lot of, you know, getting the word out, doing interviews, things of that nature. We're going to explore some other platforms in the future, hopefully, and possibly add some content. And we're doing a soundtrack release.
Yeah, it's kind of the same thing. My game is out already, so right now I'm just continually updating it and hopefully porting to other platforms.
Yeah, exactly the same. Updating and porting to other platforms.
All right, thanks.
Next.
How did you find your audio and composers?
I thought we'd get through a whole PAX 10 without that question coming up once. It always comes up at least once.
So the person that did the audio for our game, his name is Tyler Woods. He's a student at our school, and he's pretty much one of the only people. There's a few, but he does a lot of audio for most of the games at DigiFin.
I love
Really
all the student answers are, oh, I went to my classmate,
Yeah.
We had a due date,
Send an email.
I think what I learned, especially, I'm sure this is the same with the, like sort of the indie community and other platforms, but with the dev community with iOS, they're very helpful, you know, very networking wise when you know people. So essentially, I was talking with the people at Emanji Studios who do also, they do Hardware Master for iPhone and iPad. Essentially, I asked them like, hey, I'm looking for a sound designer. Do you guys have any recommendations? And then they had one. His name is Whitaker Blackall. And he's done a lot of iPhone games. And you just sort of reach out to him. I never talked to him before that. And it worked out really well. He lives in Chicago. I wish he was here, but
Yeah, we don't have an audio guy on our team, so we, for background music, we kind of like went through website. We're on a budget, so there's a bunch of websites. You have to listen to tons of music until you find something that slightly sounds like what you were looking for. And for sound effects, we contracted a company in Canada that does that. We met them at a conference and just clicked. So, and it was difficult also because we have like you have this vision of what you want, but you're not an audio guy, so you can't produce it. So.
Oh, also freesounds.org.
Yeah, we started like
that's
with
where
stuff
that's
like
where it
that.
starts.
So
Just
just
like
to get
if you don't
ideas.
have these sounds, just find them online somehow.
Yeah, with the Solitude Audio, Newgrounds, that is a fantastic site. I love Newgrounds. And there's a lot, there's a lot of crap there. Funny crap, but crap. But the audio portal on Newgrounds, there's a lot of really good talent there that you've just got to hunt around and make posts on the forums. And that's where I found my composer, sound guy, Jacob Neufeld, sitting right there. Which is really good. And there's tons of people like that you can find there. I don't know. I hire everyone I work with anything on Newgrounds. And they're so talented and they're so cheap.
I demand a raise!
Oh, no, I shouldn't have said that.
All right. We're good? Thank you.
So how much did you rely on other game industry people, or people working on game industry things for advice or other things while you were developing your game?
Yeah, so what did you go, who'd you go to, or how did you go about getting resources from current industry professionals, besides your professor, DigiPen?
We had all worked in the game industry previously for on the order of half a decade, and so we had friends that we trusted and whose opinions were really interesting to us. And there's actually just a section of our credits called Brain Trust with, I think, like 12 names in there. And yeah, those are the people we would send builds to periodically and get their feedback.
Yeah, I used to work at a EA studio called Pandemic Studios for about 5 years. So I get all of my feedback from my designer and programmer friends who are extremely critical. And I love it.
Yeah, I sort of didn't know anyone. I sort of came into the games industry from nowhere. I went to uni and did something completely different, and I've never worked in the industry before, so I didn't know anyone. So no one really looked at Solitude until I really released it. But I did have friends who were really hardcore gamers, which is why all the missions in Solitude are really hard. Because I got really hardcore gamers to test it all. Don't do that. Get lots of different gamers to test your games, including, lots of people who've worked in the industry. I did it wrong.
So I'm on the same with Sim. I did not know anyone, and so no experience in the gaming industry. I was a designer for AOL before we started making this stuff. But my biggest recommendation is going to conferences, and especially if you have something sort of kind of ready, So GDC was a big thing for us. That's where we made our pivot to change our style, And then so if you don't know anyone, don't be afraid about that. Just go to GDC or Pax10, something like that, where industry types are there, and say hello to everyone, make friends.
Sadly, I couldn't really afford that. I'm Australian. It's kind of really far away.
Yeah, like we are from Israel, and also there's not a lot of development community there, and we didn't know anybody. We've done different things before, not games industry related, but so like go to conferences, it's one option, and just reach out to people. Like we didn't do this until the point we needed some help with the business side of things, but we should have done it earlier because people are so friendly. And it's surprising. Like, all right, if you just got an idea, don't email and hassle them. But
they're friendlier when you have something to show.
Yeah, when you have something to show and you can actually, show them something they can base their advice on. So usually you can find. If not, just okay, they're busy. Go to the next person.
Speaking as a former publisher, a lot of it comes down to execution, so it's hard to evaluate a concept, because I've seen great concepts turn into really crappy games because of execution. So when it gets to the execute part, that's when you can properly evaluate something. So, next question?
All right, most of you guys, or a lot of the indie games I've seen, are puzzle games. So the basic question is, why the hell are there so many damn indie puzzle games, and why aren't there more genres?
Well, I didn't make an indie puzzle game. That's because I'm not very smart. I can't do indie puzzle games. I can't understand them. They're too complicated. So I'm like, no, I'm not going to make a game like that. I'm just going to make things with explosions. Things are going to crash and everything's going to go so I just want to make that.
Is the proper question, are indie puzzle games just meant to show off the developer's incredible intelligence?
That's how I do it.
So, actually, I was looking at
It's a game about exploding things.
Depends on how you define puzzle games, I guess. Have you seen our game? Splatters.
I walked by it.
You went by it.
It's not a puzzle game.
It's not a puzzle game. All right, so that's.
But yeah,
I wouldn't put. I don't think any of the games up here are traditional puzzle games. There was a couple last night that.
Yeah, it was mostly last night.
Word Fighter is sort of a puzzle game, but really, like, it's a word game, like Boggle, Scrabble. You don't really call this puzzle games per se.
I meant more in like general.
I think, you know, to answer your question, I don't know if this is going to be right or anything, but maybe it's because there's a lot of ways to innovate in sort of like that, like, I guess, abstract concept. And it's easier to sort of communicate through a puzzle versus, like, I don't know, a shooter.
Well, it also has to do with. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, like this, you look at all the shooters down on the 4th floor, and they're all the same to me, but they're all got flashy graphics and lots of features and all online multiplayer and all these fancy things, and the fun derives from all the fancy things that shooters do. I don't really know. But indie puzzle games are a really simple way to add a really complicated and meaningful mechanic into the game that doesn't really require fancy graphics or fancy features or anything. It's a lot of puzzle games are just single player, they're easy to make, you can put simple graphics on them, and you can make a really engaging experience.
Right. Yeah. With no need for flash. Right?
Yeah, I think the production is a big part of it, because like if you have an epic story to tell, it's hard, like doing all the assets, all the graphics.
It'll be really hard for an indie team to make like Uncharted 3.
Come on. We should all get together and make it.
Yeah, let's do that.
I reckon we can do it.
With puzzles.
Next question.
So when you're working on your games, at what point do you decide on a platform and also any game engines?
Well, wow, those are two very, well, I guess they're sort of related questions. Did your choice of engine determine what platform you came on?
Well,
or
unless you
did
picked Unity, and you're sort of set for any platform.
Yeah, I guess so.
Pick Unity. Apparently, no. Yeah. So, did you design with a platform in mind?
I mean, for our game, we we weren't particularly resource rich as a studio, so doing things like getting dev kits for consoles and so forth is a pretty significant kind of upfront, well-capitalized expenditure. So the PC was our initial platform because it was just very practical. It was great support, it's super extensible. Distribution is easier, pretty democratic, frankly. And, well, I'm sorry, what was the second part of the question? It was engine. Right. So yeah, we rolled our own engine, partly because the person who wrote the engine, my brother, had a very clear idea of how he wanted to express games, and there wasn't an engine available at the time that was really properly set up to do that. Although since then, Unity has actually gotten within striking distance of that. I would guess you would agree. But yeah, that was a big part of it.
It's a pretty obvious answer for us. I mean, because we are an iOS company, and so we wanted to make a game that was made well for the touch interface. And I completely believe, even though like we're thinking about maybe porting to other platforms, that the game that we made is perfect for a touch interface, and that's how I wanted to approach the game design.
DigiPen pretty much requires us to make everything from scratch, so we had to make it for the PC, and we had to make our own engine pretty much. So.
Yep. Started with XNA for my previous project, but my Xbox Live indie sales were abysmal, so I decided to go to the PC, and I needed to go cross-platform PC, so I just rolled my own little engine with a low-level library called SFML, and yeah, going cross-platform has worked out pretty well for me.
Yeah, I used XNA for my PC, so I need to talk to you about going from XNA, but yeah, I had experience with XNA, I had used it, I was comfortable with it, so it was just logical for me to make the game with that and get it on PC and Xbox.
Yeah,
really, I don't really have the knowledge, I can't really say, I'm going to make this game in here and this game here, and I'm just going to magically learn it. I don't really have time to do that. I need to do what I know, which at this point in time is just XNA, and then just roll on those platforms and make sure I design the game around the platforms and not really design a game and then do the platforms afterwards.
Yeah, same here. I mean, I'm a C++ guy. I worked with DirectX. I didn't know XNA as well, so that's what I went and I rolled my own engine. Also, we wanted to do like this fancy physics-based stuff that I didn't know any engine did test it.
So
So make your own engine. Unless you're on iOS.
No, that's not, yeah.
All right, next question.
So distribution is always an issue. How did you guys decide, I guess your platform somewhat decides it, but what are some of the hurdles you had to kind of leap over to get, like for instance, Steam or iOS? Have there been any, like, do you ever feel constrained, anything like that? What are some of the big hurdles you had to sort of go over to get distributed through those?
So now's your opportunity to badmouth the people that get the game in consumers' hands.
Well, I love Steam. I love Valve. They're lovely to work with. I mean, I know a lot of people have had trouble getting on with them, and that's probably the issue. Once you work with them, they're great. I don't know, I didn't have too much trouble with Steam because my game is a sequel to a game which did really rather well. So if you can have a previous sort of thing and say, I've been very successful, I've sold well, I reckon this other game will do really well, or you have a really good prototype and you have a really clear vision for what the game is going to be, you have a really clear design and concept, then I reckon places like Steam will see that and go, yep, we could probably accommodate this. But Xbox Live Arcade and PSN, they're a bit different, and consoles are really hard to develop for as an indie. Be really careful about going with those guys.
Yes.
So,
it's hard.
Distribution for the App Store, iOS market, it's pretty easy. I mean, you just sort of sign up. $100 gets you a registration as a developer in the App Store, and then you just sort of submit a game and it's out. That's basically the biggest problem, though, with it's not distribution, it's awareness.
Yeah, you got to get people knowing about your
and
game.
it's a matter of, you know, iOS market is about the next new thing, the hot new thing next week, you know, always new releases all the time. And so our biggest hurdle is getting people to know that our game is coming out, or our game is out there. And so this is sort of what we're doing now. And that was the biggest mistake we made last year in our first game. We just released it and we sort of tried to figure out if people would see it after that. And in iOS, you cannot think that way anymore. So you have to get people aware of the game and be ready to buy the game when it comes out. And then that gives you your biggest shot at going to the top 20, top 50. You know, this wave of, you know, this sort of word of mouth kind of thing, and like just releasing something no one knows about it, and maybe it'll get like hyped up, kind of like Tiny Wings. That's like 1 in a billion these days. So you cannot think that way anymore if you're thinking about App Store. So do everything you can to get people to know about the game before it comes out.
The best advice I can give is similar, just based on our own experience. We entered the IGF with our game, and we got an honorable mention for our audio. And Steam actually contacted us after that. And I think that like getting into competitions and just getting your work out there, you know, if you've worked hard on it and made something decent, that can really blow your visibility to the point where, you know, it's a much more compelling, you know, value proposition for a distributor like Steam.
Oh yeah, Pax10 for us made a huge difference.
Yeah, PS
Apple called us, publishers called us, you know, and that's huge.
Awesome. Like when you go to places like PAX, you can go around and meet people. I mean, they get a lot of emails and they get a lot of faceless emails from people and just random games or whatever. If you can actually go to meet these people in person and give a handshake and buy them a beer, they'd be much more receptive to your idea. Buy them a lot of beer. It's even more receptive.
That's true.
Yeah, I agree. I was there. Next question.
How have your guys' business partnerships been with either publishers or the gatekeepers to distributors like Steam or SPLA? And if you haven't chosen to go with business publishers, why have you made that decision?
Well, we just announced a month ago that Microsoft is our publisher for Xbox Live Arcade.
Nice work. Congratulations.
Thank you. Xbox Live Arcade is a platform where you have to have a publisher. So we really wanted to get on that platform. And that also relates to the previous question. Like, we tried for almost a year to find a way to get the deal, and IGF totally helped us get that deal. So contests are awesome. Yeah.
Okay.
Do you consider Xbox Live indie games a market worth targeting?
Oh yeah, I've followed indie games since the very start. I've got a hell of a lot to say about indie games. A lot of bad and a bit of good. It's a really tough market. I've done really well with it, but I did that by having a very original game and then building on that and making another original game, and by sticking in the top rated lists, that keeps exposure and games keep selling there. But if you just want to jump in there now, it's really hard. You have to try and make something that's both good and really appealing and viral. It's not an easy market, and honestly, it depends how much skills you have and how much you want to go, how far you want to go. If you just want to play around as a hobby, then it's a great way to release a game on a console and have people play it, and you might do okay if you make a really fun, solid title. But if you want to go really serious and really make a solid game and make a company and try and make a lot of money, then indie games is probably where you don't want to go. I mean, me and Blendo Games, we both went to Steam, and we've been very happy there, and that's, yeah, Steam.
Yes. We actually also looked at indie games. At the time, we weren't able to get a publisher for our game, and the market is bad, definitely. You don't see a lot of games selling well. But then again, you see a lot of crap on there. So we were kind of thinking, like, I think the numbers already show that if a really good game will be there, it might sell really well. We were just not brave enough to do that with our game. So it's a risk. It's a big risk to go on.
I got a question for you, actually. So I released a couple of games on Splash Live Indie Games, and I thought they were pretty good. But so I just released them, but I didn't really do anything to really talk about them or promote them. I mean, I was wondering, did you do anything of it?
No, Soul was just sort of the kind of game that was just original, different enough for people to talk about it, and also had sort of the addictive elements. It was an idea that worked a hell of a lot better than I thought it would, and people really caught on that. I don't know, it's really hard to say, just make a game that's like no other game out there. That's not as, it's not easy. You can't just do it and just make it go off and do that. It's really, really hard market. I'd only go there if you just want to get games out there and you maybe want to make some money and just sort of release something. If you want to make a business, you want to do it full time, look into other platforms, look into serious platforms, or look into making an indie team and do something really big.
I'm worried that all the people leaving work for Microsoft.
Yeah, well,
we're not saying anything new here.
Just as a success story, the newly announced Penny Arcade Adventures 3 with Z-Void was discovered because of their Breath of Death game on the Microsoft Live indie games.
Oh, that was because they released on Steam.
No, we knew about them before they went to Steam.
Oh, really?
Yep.
Nice.
So there is the occasional success story, so it's not all doom and gloom.
So you guys have mentioned that time was very hard on small teams, especially with working full-time on other jobs to pay your bills and stuff. Were there any incentives or anything used to sort of keep people on track and to keep them actually spending the time that they do have available on the game rather than playing other games, for instance?
Just yell at them.
Terror. Passing our class.
I think the answer, if you want to develop an indie game, you gotta go to school. They give you a deadline, they give you the resources, they give you your team.
I'm only one person and I'm self-published, so I was burning through my savings, which is a bad thing.
Yeah, the money thing can be a real wolf at the door, which can help. There's also just sort of structuring your day in a particular way where you do meetings at a certain time, and we found that there was a weird phenomenon where if you came in and other people had gotten there before you, you would sit down and start reading your email maybe, and they would kind of be like, oh, dude who got here late is reading his email, like we should wait before starting the meeting, and maybe I'll go read some news while he does that, and that can kind of chain into a procrastination combo. It's like lunchtime, so yeah, having a system where you're like, okay, as soon as the last person gets here, it's like full stop. We actually stand up, and the meeting is done on your feet, and there's not a lot of spinning around in your chair and being comfortable and thinking and talking slowly. It's a lot of what are we doing today? Let's do it. So that helped us a lot.
Trying to create a structure, at least as best you can. I mean, usually I'm working with my friends, so it's tough to sort of try to enforce, stuff getting done. And sometimes you do have to be the asshole and be like, listen, we have to get this done now, And in regards to sort of helping us get along, there's deadlines that you can see in the future. PAX was a deadline. GDC was a deadline. And it's even hard for us to even meet that. And you try to have regular meetings when you can. I'm sure all of us have had really long nights, trying to get stuff done to meet a deadline. Chris, our developer right here, he was up until 7 a.m. on Friday to finish the build that we have showing at PAX. So he didn't even sleep. He slept during the show so he catch up. But no, it just happened. And if you really want to make your game successful, you're willing to sort of take sacrifices like that. So
yeah, that's a good point. Competitions are really good. I mean, not only can you enter them and you've got a chance of just being signed up right away, and you get to go to places and talk to developers about your game. They impose deadlines. Deadlines are good because you get something done. You say, I need to make this game. And there's lots of competitions like IGF, IndieCade, and other things I've forgotten about that go around the year. And if you can just get that deadline and just make sure you've got a build ready for that deadline, you'll find that things get done well.
He was so disgusting with what you had to say.
No, next question.
I'm sorry.
What do you guys sitting up here think that it was about your game that got you up there? What do you guys personally think that special thing was?
Talk about how great your game was.
I bribed them, so.
This is not true. We may or may not have received additional funds.
For us, I'd say just fun. I mean, people just really liked flowing through the levels and moving fast and just flipping around. And yeah, I mean, execution is also a big thing. If you don't execute well enough, then it's not going to be noticed at all.
Yeah, our game is, we're very proud of kind of that inner loop of fun and how hard we worked on polishing it. I don't think that our game is a 4-player co-op game. In terms of feature set, it's not like, there isn't that really crazy, juicy, incredible, indie, innovative feature. So I think I would chalk up most of it to just polish. We just worked really, really hard, tightening up that inner loop of gameplay and doing the last 5% as best we could. And that really did make a difference for us.
We had a panel at PAX10 called the PAX 11 through 13. And it was 3 games that didn't make the top 10. And the developers let us pick them apart. And we got a panel of judges up there in the industry, and we played it for several hours, all 3 games. And what it basically came down to for those 3 titles was not clearly communicating to the game player within the first 5 to 10 minutes what they need to be doing. So it really came down to how you introduce your game to the player. I don't know if that's going to be true for all of them, but I think it's one thing that these games have all done very well, is it's very easy to pick up and learn quickly what I'm supposed to do, either through a well thought out tutorial or visual clues, or however you choose to communicate that.
To speak to that point, the way I solved that was to put my game in front of my mom.
That's awesome.
Yeah, we determined that there could be a whole nother panel just about playtest resources for indie folks, because a lot of it seemed to come down with getting valuable, real playtest as opposed to the family who might... Apparently your mom was fairly critical. They aren't always going to be that way. Next.
Where do you find funding for contractors?
Where do you find funding? Specifically for additional help, but in general you can speak to how your game is funded.
Yeah, I just walk around in the gutters and find coins.
A couple hours a weekend, usually.
Is Australia just full of money lying in the
really hard.
It's like the Mushroom Kingdom. There's just money everywhere. Small denominations, but it's
no, I started small, and then I made a bit of money, and then I made a slightly bigger game, and then I made a bit more money, and maybe did a bit of work on the side. And pretty much it wasn't just, I decided to randomly make a really big game out of nowhere. It was sort of slowly building up and building up. But it was also revenue sharing stuff, so I can just say, I'll give you a percentage of the cut, so I don't have to worry about funding it up front. But it wasn't a huge concern for me, because I'm just a single developer. I could cover my own expenses. It wasn't too hard. I had games previously. So just build it up and build up funds from previous titles before you go big. Don't try and go big straight away with no funding, because not only will you probably not have enough money to see it through, but you probably don't have the experience either. So just go small and build up.
For us, I mean, funding is from our bank accounts. Just really, our company is self-funded. Chris and I co-founded the company, and so we sort of split the investments 50-50. And that money just comes from our contract jobs, I guess, and our day jobs. And then we just, when you find contractors, obviously you try to find cheap ones. And we found friends. Yeah, we found friends who were incredibly talented, and willing to work with us, and so that helps out a lot.
Yeah, I think that's building on that a little bit. We are self-funded as well. We saved a lot of money when we were working in the AAA world, and then we cut our cost of living down dramatically, and that was how we were able to work full time. But a lot of the time, the way that we were able to fund an external contractor, particularly for something like audio, is we would leverage their excitement for the project to try to work out a deal where they'd be willing to do a certain amount of, to do the job for a certain amount of money up front against a more speculative amount of money on the back end. And the people that we approached, a lot of them were like pretty excited about the idea of the game and the amount of it that they had seen, and so those deals were kind of, they were easier to put together because we had something to show that they thought was cool.
Yeah. We are also self-funded. When Siggy and I started the company, we still both have kind of day jobs, kind of. Like, it's less these days because it's really grown and stuff, but certainly early on, we kept our day jobs and paid for everything.
I'm surprised no one mentioned grants, because I've heard that for many years, especially in Australia and in Canada. A lot of the governments offer grants if you bother to fill out the paperwork.
The governments give us money to make games?
Yeah.
How was I uninformed?
Speaking from experience, Canada is not the video game funding sort of mecca. It once was. There's been a lot of cutbacks in that, and I thought I would be able to get a grant and help start off my sound effect business, but they're just not doing that anymore.
For those who can't hear, he says Canada won't give him any more money.
Yeah.
So, next question.
What influenced you to be where you are now, whether that was through education or just a sudden epiphany?
You mean as people or as developers? As developers.
When I was really little, I used to just make board games all the time. I'd bug my parents to go play them. And then at one point I just kind of realized, like, well, that's kind of what I want to do. So that's all I got to do now.
For me, it was, this is something I really wanted to do since I was very young. I couldn't wrap my head around how to go about doing that because it wasn't even a gaming industry in Israel. So there wasn't even the option to go and work unless I wanted to relocate, which I didn't. And then I think that initial burst of indie games, successful indie games, really inspired me. Like the Braid and World of Goo and Explosion. I mean, all of these awesome games. And you see like very small teams making like what I thought was great games, all around great games. So that said, like, I can do this. So.
Yeah, my dad brought home the first video game I ever played for the Apple II when I was quite young, which was called Load Runner, and it had Load Runner had a level editor that shipped with every copy of the game, and within a couple hours of playing my first video game, I was building levels for it. So I mean, I've been a game developer for maybe 2 hours less than I've been a gamer. Tim and I, my brother Tim and I run our little company together with our friend Hal, and Tim and I have been making games together for something like 20 years, and like I'm 31. Like it was utterly natural, to do this. It felt like a foregone conclusion when we finally were able to pull the trigger logistically to make it happen. It wasn't like a scary prospect. It felt inevitable.
Yeah, like you, but for me, my game was Doom. Making apps for it, it's like, oh.
WAD files.
Yep.
I remember. Right, so, Destiny.
Hard. I'm interested in games that were negative examples. In other words, you thought, I can do that much better. Or there's this one part of the game. And if you don't have something like that, maybe just what game during your process inspired you to keep going by looking at somebody else's game and thinking about that. But more interestingly, the negative example.
I love the questions that are meant to incite some sort of soundbite that will get them in trouble in the press.
I will regret this for 15 years. I actually won't. I don't know if it's that controversial. We looked at a lot of 4-player co-op games because our game is a 4-player co-op game. And we drew a lot of inspiration from games like Left 4 Dead and Little Big Planet and Rock Band. And we also looked at New Super Mario Brothers. I might just leave it there. There were some choices that they made with the 4-player co-op in that game that we felt that we learned a lot from because of how unsuccessful they were for us. And that actually did sort of drive some of our decision making as we designed our own game. So.
It's not really negative, but there was a level in Super Mario Galaxies 2 where gravity flips. And I remember there's one part where there's a platform going up and down, and you hit a switch, you ride the platform up, hit the switch, gravity flips, you jump on the bottom side of the platform, and you can then progress. And I remember thinking, you can make a whole game around that, having triggers that flips gravity. And that's really where a lot of the inspiration came from for us.
I just wanted to be clear that Jamestown will not be on WiiWare in the near future. That probably won't hurt their sales in any way.
Oh, Jeff. Let's not say anything we can't take back.
It's okay. I have a little bit of plausible deniability since I gave them a decade of my life.
Fair. Hard and fair.
I don't see anyone else lined up, but I'm curious how much time was spent prototyping versus actual, okay, this is it, we're going into full production. Or maybe you never really stopped prototyping.
So I made the prototype for our game in a month, and did it in Game Maker.
I don't understand why Digibet answers these questions. Oh yeah, 2 weeks, and then we had this finished game.
I also had an English paper due at the same time.
I'm not. It's not real life yet. That's why I'm confused.
We spent about 6 months in Flash, actually, while our engine was being built, doing more kind of pie-in-the-sky prototyping of throwing a lot of ideas at the wall. And but I would definitely say that, yeah, prototyping really never stops. Every feature that we signed up for, we would try to figure out an efficient way to get a lot of information about whether or not it was going to be successful as quickly as possible. And I mean, that's a prototype, and I think that's game development. That's not like a phase in the pipeline for us. That was just how a game got made.
Was there anything along the lines where you drastically said, you know what, we need to cut back? So you spent a lot of work in something, or developed a whole gameplay system, and then took a step back and realized it was superfluous or unnecessary?
Yes.
The overworld.
For us in particular, I think the lessons learned from what we did in our first release in the App Store was really what drove sort of the development process of the second game, our second Word Fighter. So we made a music game for the iPhone called Bongo Blitz, and we were speaking of like negative comments, or whatever. We were like, Tap Tap Revenge, that game sucks, and that used to be a #1 game in the App Store like 2 years ago, and we were like, we can do this better. Where the heck is Rock Band? That was when it wasn't there in iTunes Store yet. And so we were making our game, and we realized we bit off way too more than we can chew. Licensing music and all this crazy stuff. 2-man team trying to do a music game on iPhone. What the hell were we thinking? But it was kind of successful, not really. But that drove us to be very particular about scope, and like the prototype. Like let's come up with a simple game, and at least in the game mechanics, and then start expanding from that. But don't bite off more than you can chew, or else we're gonna fail like the first time. So, and that's where it started, like baby steps towards figuring out what.
So touching on that, maybe if you could go back to when you very first started the project, what would you tell that person in terms of avoid this, don't do this? What mistake did you make that you wish you could go back and say, okay, don't go down that path?
Just limit your features. I remember when we started the game, we knew the basic concept of flipping. And there's many ways you can do that. And we sat down one day on a whiteboard and we literally wrote down maybe 20 to 30 features. And I think we honestly thought we could do it and get all these features in the game and mechanics. And we got four.
So I'm going back in time to tell myself, can I work with myself and continue?
Have a two-man team. That would be awesome. As well. I honestly still don't know how to answer that question because I haven't had time for it to sink in and know what mistakes I've made. I mean, I need a bit more distance from it, I guess.
You got 5 minutes.
5 minutes?
For me, it was, I fell into the trap of making beautiful art for my prototypes. Like some silly prototype and all these beautiful icons for us. Then I just throw it out the next day.
I want to defend you from the past a little bit for that decision. I actually did a lot of UI art that was pretty hi-fi on systems that we hadn't proven out the usability particularly well. And it was sort of a trap. There's a subtle trap that we fell into where we had actually gotten the usability up to a pretty good level with temporary art, and then we simultaneously did what we considered to be relatively minor revisions to the layout of those screens, and then we locked in final art. And we didn't realize that those minor changes had actually torpedoed usability in a pretty painful way. And I would say that would be, it's one of these things where you learn a lot of lessons from even your failures, when things don't work out. Sometimes you have to do the art to a pretty high level of polish to be like, okay, like I gave this a real shot to work, and it doesn't. And you actually do learn a lot by eliminating that option. That's one less thing that's going to work, if that makes any sense.
And then you can put the art in like a unlockable thing, like you can do developers commentary or developer artwork, and you can have all your pictures there, so you can do something with it.
All right. Last question.
So I was curious about the moment where you almost gave up, or the biggest roadblock to get through.
There wasn't one for us. I mean, it took a ton of persistence, but there wasn't a moment where we thought, like, we're going to give up.
Yeah. For us, I mean, I fell in love with the concept once I sort of came up with it. So the idea was, how do I make something like Boggle, a word game, competitive? And then one day I was sitting on the couch and I remembered Super Puzzle Fighter. It's like, oh my god, they did that with Tetris. I can do it with Boggle too. I know I can. From that moment, I have not stopped. And so there hasn't been like, there's no like, should I give up? Should I stop? It's just like, this can work. I know this can work. So that's where we are right now.
It's interesting because last night the same question came up and all of them said